Alrighty, so where do all of these analogies ultimately take Judith Jarvis Thompson in terms of a conclusion or a position on the ethics of abortion? It's important for us to remember that she begins her argument by making a major concession. Right at the outset, she says, okay, for the purposes of my argument, I'm going to concede that a fetus is a person, a human being at the moment of conception, and, this is important, it has a right to life. It has a right to life from the moment of conception. But, Jarvis Thompson says, having a right to life does not entail having a right to the means to sustain life. And this is a critical distinction for Jarvis Thompson in terms of her ultimate position on abortion, that she acknowledges that the fetus is a human being from the moment of conception with a right to life, with a right not to be killed unjustly, but that is not the same thing as having a right, a claim to the means to sustain life. And so her ultimate conclusion is this: abortion may be morally permissible because a person with a right to life does not necessarily have the right to use the owned body of another person to sustain its own life. And key in on the concept here of owned body and reflect back on ethical libertarianism and how fundamental the concept of bodily ownership is to ethical libertarians. And that seems to be the kind of driving value that leads Jarvis Thompson to this conclusion. But the conclusion is kind of not a funny one, but it's not it doesn't lead to an obvious code for behavior, right? Because abortion may be morally permissible, she says, but she doesn't go into any great depth about what the conditions would be that would make abortion morally permissible, right? Because she's not saying it is morally permissible, she's saying it may be. And that implies that it may not be as well. So how does Jarvis Thompson give us some guidance here on determining when abortion is morally permissible and when it isn't? And to help us navigate through that question, Jarvis Thompson brings in this concept of decency, the idea that we want to all be decent people. We all have this idea that there's a bar of expectation that we expect ourselves and others to rise to in order to earn the label of being a decent person. And Jarvis Thompson even goes further and says this: when we think about decency, what we're really thinking about is how we interact with others, how we fulfill the obligations that we have to others, our behavior, and whether or not our behavior is fair, whether or not it meets the standards of justice. And Jarvis Thompson breaks this quality of decency into four different gradations. We have minimal decency, or being a minimally decent person, a very decent person, a splendidly decent person. So we might think about the situations that we encounter where we may have obligations to other people. They're not obligations written into law. They're obligations that we have that are rooted in our ethics, in morality. So you're on public transportation, the bus is completely full, and you see somebody get on the bus who's obviously mobility impaired. Maybe they're really old, but for whatever reason, you know this person is not going to be able to safely travel on this moving bus by just holding the rail and standing up. Do you give your seat up to that person, or do you just sit there and kind of smile at them like, yeah, I'm enjoying my seat. Too bad for you that you're not able to stand steadily and that you're afraid. It seems like a minimally decent person would, help the person into the seat and help them out by giving their seat and sitting down. What about if you see a crying child somewhere? You can see this child's hurt or it's upset. Does a minimally decent person just walk by that kid and shrug your shoulders and say, that sucks for you? Or does a minimally decent person, it provides some degree of comfort, like, oh, I'm sorry, it's going to be okay? Or does a decent person, rising above that floor of minimally decent, does a decent person say to the kid, hey, where's your parents? I need to go get your parents so that you they can take care of you. Think about organ donation. If my daughter needed one of my kidneys in order to survive, and I'm the only eligible donor for her, as her father, would I be falling below the standards for minimal decency if I said, sorry, sweetie, I want both my kidneys. I'm not giving you one. Sucks for you, but I need both of them just in case one of them goes bad someday. And you'd probably look at me like, oh, dude, a minimally decent father would give his daughter, a kidney in order to save her life. Now, we might raise that bar up a little higher and say, well, if it's not me that's able to give her the kidney, but somebody else in our extended family, to be decent people, would they have to give her the kidney? If they refused and said, I know I'm a match, but I don't want to do it, Would we say like, oh, that's not cool? I mean, maybe you're not a terrible person, but you're certainly not a good person. Sometimes you'll read these stories about like the school teacher who voluntarily donates a kidney for one of her students, or the story I read, uh, this guy who took himself very seriously as a utilitarian said, I don't know of anybody who needs my kidney, but I know that someone does. Therefore, I'm going to donate my kidney anonymously so that somebody else in the world who needs a kidney donation can take advantage of it. And that's going to create the greatest good for the greatest number, right? What about if you see a baby floating by in a stream and it's got its face down, and you just kind of watch it as it struggles along and drowns, not rising to the level of being a minimally decent person, right? What if the baby's not just floating face down in front of you, but is actually kind of out in the middle of the river? You know you can swim out there to save it and be relatively safe yourself. Seems like a decent person would do that. What if, though, it's somebody who's drowning in really tumultuous waves out in the ocean? And you know there's a good chance if you go out to save this person that you could end up drowning as well. But you choose to do it anyway. Aren't we going to say you're getting into that territory of being a very decent or splendidly decent person? Like, you're going way above and beyond. We wouldn't expect you to do this. If you stood on that shore while this person drowned out in the ocean, we would expect at minimum that you might call somebody for help, but we don't have expectations that you're going to put your own life at risk for a stranger who's out in the middle of this very dangerous ocean. Okay, so this is the sort of guide that Jarvis Thompson is going to give us in order to figure out the circumstances under which abortion may be morally permissible. Maybe.